As I sat at my desk, my mind drifted back to the years since Bethany and I exchanged our vows. I found myself recalling our honeymoon and the unforgettable moments we shared. Those memories that, even now, bring a warm, nostalgic glow whenever I think of them. Around 6:30 p.m. on a Sunday, Bethany walked through the front door, carelessly tossing her purse and keys onto the nightstand before heading down the hallway toward the master bedroom. I couldn't be sure if she saw me sitting there in the office, but honestly, it didn't matter much. Over the years, she'd made it pretty clear that I might as well have been invisible. As she moved further away, I grabbed her keys off the nightstand, swapped them with my spare set, and began rifling through her purse. I pulled out her phone and wallet, making sure to take all the cash and credit cards. Just to be thorough, I also slipped out her driver's license before quietly returning to my spot in the office. About 15 minutes later, Bethany came back into the room, now dressed up and looking like she was ready for a night out. Slipping her purse over her shoulder, she grabbed her keys and casually tossed over her shoulder. "I'm going out with some girls from work. Don't wait up." "You're not going out with coworkers," I responded, my voice unwavering. She shot me a defiant look, one she'd perfected over the years. "Joseph, by now you should know better. You don't get to control me. I'll do whatever I want." "I'm not saying you can't go out with your coworkers," I replied, keeping my tone even. "But let's be real here. You're not meeting them. You're going to see your boyfriend. Don't insult me by pretending otherwise." For a second, Bethany seemed caught off guard by my bluntness. Then, without missing a beat, she walked into the office, leaning against the doorframe with a smug confidence. "All right, Joseph, if we're doing this, let's do it right. I'd rather we handle this differently, but here's the deal. You have two options. Either you give me some space and let me live my life, and we try to save what's left of this marriage, or we end it now. You choose. Let me have my freedom, or lose me completely. What's it gonna be?" Couldn't help but smirk. "I'll take option 3. She rolled her eyes, clearly unimpressed. "Don't be so naive. There is no option 3. You either accept that I have a lover, a real man, or you get ready for what comes next." Without saying another word, I stood up, walked over to her, and pushed her back firmly against the wall. I stared at her, unwavering, and slowly removed her engagement ring and wedding band from her left hand. My voice dropped into a cold, almost predatory whisper. "Here's your option 3. The front door. And when you walk through it, you'll leave with nothing. No money, no car, no house, no job. Nothing. You're done." For the first time, Bethany's confidence cracked. She stumbled over her words, her bravado slipping. "You're delusional, Joseph. My lawyer is going to have a field day with this. I'll send the divorce papers to your office tomorrow. And if you try anything, you'll regret it. You'll pay way more than I ever will." I grabbed her arm, yanked her away from the wall, and dragged her toward the front door. Her heels clattered on the floor as she struggled to keep her balance, her muffled screams incomprehensible as she tried to break free. Throughout our marriage, I had never laid a hand on her, and it was clear she was completely caught off guard. As she stumbled outside, I slammed the door shut behind her and locked it, using the brand new lock I'd installed earlier that day. Once she was gone, I made my first call. The first was to Heidi, my 19-year-old daughter, who was away at college. "Hey, it's Dad," I said, my voice calm but heavy. "There's been a major development with your mom. It looks like she's moving in with her boyfriend, and I thought you should know. Just so you're aware, I've recorded a lot of our conversations, especially the arguments. You can listen to them whenever you want, so you'll know exactly what happened if she tries to spin things her way. She's been cheating, Heidi. I'm not sure how many times, but this time, she's picked this guy over us. I'll explain more when you're home, but just so you know, her boyfriend's a shady character. Watch yourself around him." I asked her to come home that weekend to talk in person, and, thankfully, she agreed. With that sorted, I made my second call, this time to Grace, our neighbor down the street. "Hi, Grace, it's Joseph," I said, keeping it brief. "If your offer's still on the table, I'd like to take you up on it. Could you come over in about an hour?" I trusted Grace. Over the years, She had become someone I could confide in. Bethany and I had married young, and Heidi came along soon after. In the beginning, things had seemed perfect, but then Bethany's personality began to shift. She grew bitter, controlling, and manipulative. Despite my efforts to keep things peaceful and make her happy, nothing ever worked. Looking back now, I saw that I'd played a part in my own misery, constantly bending over backward for her. And now, in our 40s, everything had fallen apart. The moment I discovered Bethany's affair with a man named Brad, who went by the nickname Sly due to his violent reputation, was a brutal wake-up call. It was devastating, yet strangely freeing. I finally accepted that our marriage was beyond saving, and I could begin planning my next move. Unlike the stories you hear about men fighting for half the money, I took it all. Every penny I could find, from cash to accounts, everything. I changed the locks and set the stage to provoke Bethany in a way that I knew would drive her to self-destruct. She was dangerous, but this time, I was prepared to watch her implode. My preparation hadn't begun with her affair. For years, I'd quietly documented her behavior, collecting evidence of her lies and manipulation. The device Bethany thought was just an MP3 player had actually been recording every one of our arguments. Her cruelty was always saved for the privacy of our home, and I knew no one would believe my side of the story without solid proof. I wanted that evidence, not just for my own peace of mind, but for Heidi's too. One day, when she was older, I'd show her everything to expose the truth about who her mother really was. The Monday after our explosive confrontation, I threw a little celebration in the company break room. Above our heads, a bright banner read "Happy Divorce," and I'd arranged for cake and ice cream to be served. But what I was truly looking forward to was the arrival of the process server. When she showed up, a cheerful, slightly plump young woman, the timing couldn't have been more perfect. Cameras snapped as my coworkers and I turned the whole thing into a mini celebration. One photo captured me grinning ear to ear as I accepted the divorce papers and planted a playful kiss on the server's cheek. She even wore a party hat. Another shot had me feeding her a piece of cake, both of us laughing like we didn't have a care in the world. After the party, I emailed Bethany a few of the photos, including one I knew would hit her hardest. In it, I was lounging in bed with Grace, my new roommate, the sheets casually pulled up. Grace had put on Bethany's wedding rings, which rested on my chest as we both smiled at the camera, carefree and content. Not long after, my phone rang. It was Bethany, absolutely livid. "You're a scoundrel. My lawyer is going to tear you apart when he sees those photos. You're an idiot, Joseph." "Not really, Bethany," I replied, keeping my voice calm. "There's nothing wrong with those photos. No nudity, no indecency. Just some harmless fun between neighbors. You're reading way too much into it. It's all just light-hearted stuff." "Fine," she spat. "We'll deal with this later. I'm coming over tonight to get some of my things." "You'd better not be here." "If I'm not here, you won't get in," I shot back. "I've changed all the locks. If you want anything, you'll need to show up before 6:45. Because Grace and I have plans at 7 o'clock, and I'd hate to be late. Oh, and by the way, last night with Grace, best night I've had in years. And tonight, it's only going to get better." I ended the call before she could say anything else and ignored the 5 follow-up calls that followed. I hadn't been picking up most of her calls since the breakup, but I always made sure to listen to the voicemails. Bethany's temper often got the best of her, and I knew she'd slip up at some point. Sure enough, in the weeks that followed, she accidentally revealed more than she probably intended. Later that afternoon, around 4:30, I headed over to Bethany's workplace. I parked near Bethany's car, choosing a spot strategically out of range of any security cameras. I had a plan, and it wouldn't take long to execute. Pulling out a pair of wire cutters, I quickly snipped the valve stems on all 4 of her tires. She'd be furious, I was sure of it, but there was no way she'd make it home before 6:45. When I saw her come out of the building around 6:35, it was obvious she'd been out with someone. She was hurrying back, and whatever she was after, it clearly wasn't clothes. I'd seen enough receipts for things I didn't recognize to know she had a stash of stuff at her boyfriend's place. As she pounded on the front door, screaming my name, I quietly slipped out the back and made my way to Grace's house. By the time I got back that evening, I found a shattered front window and blood smeared around the frame. I reviewed the footage from the porch security camera, and it was all there. Bethany, wielding a tire iron, had smashed the window while shouting threats. In her blind fury, she hadn't realized I'd installed locks that required keys on both sides. As she tried to force her way in, she'd sliced her arm deeply on the broken glass. Her angry yells had shifted into cries of pain. I didn't hesitate. I immediately called the police and filed a report. The next morning, Bethany was served with a restraining order that kept her at least 500 feet away from me and the house. Her reaction was exactly what I'd expected. "What the hell is wrong with you, you idiot?" she screeched in her next call, venom dripping from every word. As always, I made sure to record it all. A few hours later, she called again, this time sounding a bit more composed, though no less calculating. She told me she was sending her friend Ella over that evening to collect some of her things. Curious about what she was so eager to retrieve, I agreed to meet Ella at 5:30 p.m. I left work early to prepare. In my bedroom, I set up a discreet video camera and hooked it up to a monitor in my office. When Ella showed up, I greeted her warmly, playing the part of the cordial host as she began packing Bethany's clothes into black trash bags. She was clearly nervous, but I didn't let on that I noticed. At one point, she asked for a glass of water, and I obliged. As I glanced at the monitor from the kitchen, I saw her pull a shoebox from the closet and slip it into one of the bags. That caught my attention. I went back to the bedroom, acting like nothing was out of the ordinary, and continued to watch her pack. After a while, she said, "This should be enough," and picked up one of the bags, leaving the heavier one for me. I offered to help, but she quickly pulled it closer to her, clutching it tightly. Her fidgeting was obvious. "What's in the bag, Ella?" I asked, stepping toward her. "Just clothes. Things Bethany needs," she stammered, clearly rattled. I reached for the bag, and she tried to yank it away from me, but I managed to open it, and the smell hit me instantly, old, musty bills. Inside, I found stacks of worn $50 and $100 bills. "Care to explain why you're walking out of here with a box of cash?" I asked, my voice cold as ice. "It's Bethany's," Ella protested, her voice trembling. "She told me to grab it for her." "Really?" I shot back, unable to keep the sarcasm out of my voice. "She sent you here for clothes, but you're sneaking out with cash instead? That's theft, Ella." I escorted her to the door, making it crystal clear that her excuses weren't fooling anyone. Bethany's desperation was showing, and I was going to use every mistake she made to my advantage. The moment Ella tried to leave with the bag of money, I made sure she knew I wasn't playing around. Threatening to call the police, I told her she'd have to face the consequences of getting caught red-handed. She panicked, begging me not to involve the authorities, pleading that her husband and kids would suffer. I motioned for her to sit on the couch, giving her a look of quiet disappointment. "Ella, I trusted you, but after this, you're done here. You'll never step foot in this house again." Despite her tears and frantic apologies, I remained cold. "If you want any shot at redemption, there's only one way forward. You'll leave here, go to Bethany, and tell her I caught you stealing. Then you'll become my informant. I expect you to report everything. What Bethany's up to, her plans for the divorce, and her relationship with Brad. And listen closely. If you so much as breathe a word of our deal to anyone, you'll be the one facing serious consequences. Bethany made a huge mistake getting involved with that piece of trash, and you're going to help me make her regret it." I added a final threat, making sure she knew I had the entire encounter on video and could easily file a police report if needed. Reluctantly, Ella agreed to my terms, though it was clear she hated the idea. Once she left, I took the shoebox of cash and headed to Grace's house. Without hesitation, Grace agreed to hide it for me until I could find a safer place to stash it, beyond Bethany's reach. It didn't take a genius to figure out where the money had come from. A few months ago, Bethany's Aunt Helen, known for her miserly ways, had passed away. Bethany had inherited a small rural cottage, but there'd never been any mention of cash. Now it was obvious. While going through the property, Bethany must have stumbled upon her aunt's hidden stash. That evening, my phone rang. It was Bethany, her voice dripping with rage. "Where's my money, Joseph? You know that money is mine. Give it back," she screeched. Feigning confusion, I replied, "I have no idea what you're talking about. Ella was caught trying to steal cash from my nightstand. If you're referring to that, it's my money now, Bethany." "You know exactly what I mean," she snapped. "The money in the shoebox. It's from Aunt Helen's estate." "Maybe Ella found some money in a shoebox," I countered. "But if she did, it's not in my possession. And if you've been sitting on that kind of cash without declaring it to the IRS, I'm sure they'd be very interested in hearing about it. Feel free to involve the police. I'd be more than happy to discuss this with them." Bethany screamed a final threat before slamming the phone down. I wasn't surprised. I knew I had pushed her buttons hard enough that she wouldn't just walk away. She was predictable, and I had a feeling she might retaliate, likely by targeting my car, given what I'd done to hers. Anticipating her move, I installed a dashboard camera and set up an external camera discreetly pointed at my driveway. On Wednesday morning, while I worked, I monitored the live feed on my laptop. Sure enough, just before lunch, I saw Bethany pull up behind my car. With a hammer in hand, she started smashing the windows, denting the body, and shattering the windshield, all while screaming profanities. Watching her rage unfold sent a chill through me, but I stayed calm and called 911. The police arrived just as she was finishing up her destruction. Armed with the video footage, I showed them exactly what she'd done to my car. Bethany was promptly arrested and, to top it off, added another charge for resisting arrest. As the officers led her away, she looked back at me with pleading eyes, but I didn't give her so much as a glance. Later that day, I got a call from Bethany's divorce lawyer. There was a court hearing scheduled for Thursday morning regarding the money I had withdrawn from our joint accounts. When I arrived at court, Bethany, now out on bail, strolled in with her lawyer, walking with the kind of smug confidence that only someone who thought they were still in control could have. Her lawyer began, "Your Honor, my client has been unjustly denied access to marital funds. Her husband improperly emptied their joint accounts. We're requesting a 50-50 split." The judge turned to me. "Mr. Barrington, would you like to respond?" "Yes, Your Honor." I began, my voice steady. "My wife has been quietly funneling money into her personal account for months, redirecting her salary and bonuses. The funds I withdrew were just a small compensation for the household expenses I've been covering, all while she abandoned our marriage to pursue her affair." Bethany erupted, cutting me off. "That's a lie. He drained our savings and left me with nothing." Her lawyer quickly pulled her back, ushering her into a hasty conference while I handed over my documentation to the judge. "Your Honor, here are the bank statements from the last year. As you can see, there are highlighted transactions showing Bethany's salary and bonuses, which mysteriously stopped 6 months ago. I also have a recorded conversation with her HR department, confirming that she redirected her direct deposits to her personal account." The judge examined the documents for a moment before turning to Bethany. "Miss Barrington, do you have anything to say about these claims?" Her lawyer stood up cautiously. "Your Honor, even if my client has personal funds, Mr. Barrington is still legally obligated to provide for her." The judge looked unimpressed. "Counselor, your client came into this courtroom claiming to be financially destitute, yet she has been living off diverted marital funds. She deceived both her husband and this court. Considering that Mr. Barrington has been covering all household expenses, there's no reason to change the current financial arrangement. The property division will be settled in the final divorce decree." Case dismissed. As I left the courthouse, I spotted Bethany in the hallway. She stormed up to me, hurling threats, but I stayed calm. I pulled out my phone and began recording. "Bethany, you're violating the restraining order. Leave now or I'll call the police. How was jail, by the way? Ready for another trip?" Her face turned beet red as she clenched her fists, but I didn't flinch. I turned and walked away without a second glance. Later that evening, I dropped by a bar I hadn't been to in a while. As I stepped in, I spotted Harry, a guy I'd met here before. I walked up to him with a grin. "Hey, Harry, you remember me?" He nodded, though he quickly brushed off my name. As we chatted, he complained about his clunker of a car, lamenting how his wife had taken the good one when she left him for another man. "The AC's shot, and I can't even afford to fix it," he griped. I leaned in with a smirk. "What kind of insurance do you have? If you're open to some advice, I might know a way to help you out." Harry leaned in, curious. "All right, I'm listening. Picture this." I started. "You're driving down 38th Street when suddenly, a gray cat darts out in front of you. You slam on the brakes, but then, out of nowhere, a certain blue Miata rear-ends your beat-up junker at more than 15 miles per hour. It's a total loss. But don't worry. If you're wearing your seatbelt and your head securely against the headrest, you'll be fine. Insurance will cover the damages, and you'll finally be able to get a car with air conditioning." Harry hesitated, clearly uneasy. "But what if the person behind me gets hurt? I don't think I could do that to someone." I gave him a knowing look. "I can promise you this. The driver will be an unfaithful wife, alone in the car. Follow my instructions and no one innocent will get hurt. What do you think?" Harry nodded slowly, a smirk creeping onto his face. "Man, that'd be amazing. I hate cheaters, and I really need to get rid of this junker." "Perfect," I said, the plan falling into place. "Park at the corner of 38th and Ling around 5 p.m. tomorrow. Watch for a blue Miata leaving the parking lot. It'll be heading your way. Pull out in front of it and don't let her pass. Drive for a block until she's right on your bumper. That's when you'll notice a gray cat crossing the road. Slam on the brakes. Afterward, stay in your car, call 911, and mention a possible neck injury. Oh, and remember, we've never met. I won't be back here and you don't know me." Harry grinned. "Don't worry. I'm colder than the AC in my new ride." The following Friday, I left work early to meet Heidi at home, just as planned. She'd finished her classes and returned the previous evening, eager to discuss the divorce. We sat down together, and I played her a recording of my confrontation with Bethany, the one about door number 3. Hearing her mother's cold, dismissive tone made Heidi visibly uncomfortable. I then shared recordings from the past 2 years, arguments, manipulations, and moments that revealed the side of Bethany Heidi had never seen. "Dad," Heidi said softly after a long pause, "I knew you and Mom had issues, but I never realized it was this bad. What happened between you two?" I had been expecting this question, so I took my time to answer. "Heidi, your mom and I have always had different views on what a marriage should be. Looking back, I've come to understand that there are 4 main ways power can be distributed in a relationship." I explained each dynamic to her, starting with relationships where neither partner takes control, leading to a drifting, rudderless partnership. Then I described the couples who constantly clash because both try to control everything. Some couples manage to divide things equally, I added. And that was what I hoped for when I married your mom. But it didn't work out that way. I moved on to explain other dynamics, including the traditional setup where the husband takes full control. It might seem outdated, but it works when the man is truly devoted to his wife, making her life easier and free from decisions. Your grandparents had that kind of marriage, your grandfather was dominant, and your grandmother was content to let him lead. Your mom grew up in that environment and expected the same from me. But when I tried to create an equal partnership, she saw it as weakness. I paused, checking to make sure Heidi was following. Eventually, your mom took control herself. She micromanaged everything, from family projects to how I held a hammer. It was unbearable. Over time, I couldn't stand feeling emasculated in my own home. She began seeing me as weak, and when I resisted, she treated me like a rebellious child. I wrapped it up by offering Heidi some advice for her future. When it comes to making big decisions about family, careers, or a home, mutual respect has to be the foundation. Without it, you risk ending up in an unhappy dynamic like your mom and I did. Heidi nodded slowly, her expression somber. "Thanks, Dad. I'll think about everything you said. I don't want to end up like this." Later that evening, I received a call from Memorial Hospital. Mr. Barrington, your wife was in a car accident. She's stable but has some injuries. She'll be staying overnight for observation. Heidi and I drove to the hospital together. I let her go in first, giving her space to process things with her mother. When she came back, her face was tight with tension, and I could tell she'd spoken her mind to Bethany. It was my turn now. I entered Bethany's room with a grin plastered on my face. God, Bethany, you look awful. What a week. Huh? First, you lose your husband, your home, and your marriage. Then you get slapped with a restraining order and arrested for felony vandalism. And now you've totaled your car. To top it off, here you are with a broken wrist and bruises from the airbag. Seems like this divorce is working out great for me. Bethany shot me a venomous glare. Freak you, she spat, her voice full of pure rage. I leaned closer, savoring her fury. No need to thank me. You've been making your choices for a long time. I'm just helping the inevitable along. Oh, Bethany, I said, dragging out the words with mock sympathy. Where's your old sly charm? Has he come to see you yet? Or is he too busy with one of his other girlfriends? Her face drained of color. What are you talking about? She stammered, clearly caught off guard. I leaned in closer, watching her squirm. You didn't know, did you? Slice got 2 other women besides you. I wonder how long it'll be before he starts asking you to serve them. Share your time with his other partners. Her eyes widened with disbelief. You're lying, she shouted, her voice rising in panic. Am I? I said with a smirk, relishing her discomfort. Well, you'll find out soon enough. Maybe being a people-pleaser will come in handy for you. It's a skill you'll need in prison. I'm not going to jail, she hissed, her voice low and angry. My lawyer will get these bogus charges dropped. I chuckled. Sure, Bethany. You vandalized my car and threatened me. The DA already told me he's taking this case personally. He's got photographic evidence and an election to win. Good luck with that. I paused, savoring the moment. Her anger only made it better. The DA's gunning for the maximum penalty, I added, watching her face as my words sank in. He's making an example out of you. That's what happens when you smash up someone's car and resist arrest. Bethany didn't respond. She sat there, silent, her eyes boring into me with hate. But I wasn't finished. Oh, by the way, have you figured out which car insurance company you're calling yet? I asked, knowing it would hit her like a punch to the gut. What are you talking about? She snapped, feigning ignorance. We still have the same insurance, don't we? I laughed, shaking my head. You didn't check? When you filed for divorce, I removed your car from my policy. You insisted on having the Miata in just your name, so that's all on you now. If you didn't get a new policy last week, you're in deep trouble. You'll face fines, towing fees, and 3 years of payments on a car that's probably going to end up in a junkyard. And without a job after your felony conviction, you won't even need another car. Oh, and don't forget, when the guy you hit files a claim, his insurance company will come straight to you for the money. Her face turned even paler, the realization settling in. I leaned closer, pressing the point. At least you still have your own health insurance, right? I asked mockingly. Her voice faltered. I'm on yours. Nope, I said, shaking my head with feigned disappointment. I removed you from my health insurance on Monday. Didn't you handle that too? That ambulance ride, the ER visit, the x-rays, the cast for your wrist, the hospital stay. All out of pocket now, Bethany. We're talking thousands of dollars. Bethany's jaw clenched, but she didn't have a response. There was nothing she could say to defend herself. I could see the weight of her situation crushing down on her. I leaned in, smirking just a little. You've really outdone yourself this time. As I turned to walk out, I felt a surge of satisfaction. The game was over. She'd pushed me too far, and now she was facing the consequences of her own actions. I didn't look back. The final chapter was closing, and it was time to let her stew in her own mess. I clenched my fists as Heidi continued, her voice shaking with anger and disbelief. I told him I wasn't going to do anything for him, but he grabbed me by the arm and tried to force me to stay. He said that if I didn't, I'd be betraying Mom. He kept talking about how Mom had made her choices, and now I had to help him with his, because I owed her. She swallowed hard, her eyes moistening as she tried to hold it together. I got away. I told him I wasn't part of whatever sick plan he had, and I left. But I didn't want to tell you. I didn't want you to think that this was happening because of the divorce. My heart twisted. I felt a surge of rage and protectiveness, but it wasn't directed just at Brad. I felt disgusted, revolted by Bethany's silence, by her enabling him, by everything they had turned into. God! Heidi? I breathed, struggling to keep my voice even. You did the right thing. I should have known. I should have seen it coming. Heidi shook her head, wiping her eyes. I didn't want to be a part of it. I don't even know what's going on with her anymore. Dad. She's not the mom I remember. I swallowed hard, knowing this wasn't just about me and Bethany anymore. This was about Heidi, my daughter, being dragged into the mess Bethany had created. And I'd let it happen. I stood up and paced around, my thoughts a storm. I'm going to make sure he pays for this, Heidi. No one gets away with hurting you or your mother or anyone else. You hear me? She nodded, but her face was tight, guarded. I'm scared, Dad. I don't want you to get hurt. I knelt in front of her, gripping her hands. Listen to me. I'm not going to let anything happen to you. You're my daughter, and I'll protect you, no matter what. And as for Brad, he's going to pay. I'll make sure of it. Heidi took a shaky breath and nodded, but I could see the weight of everything bearing down on her. I needed to act fast. I had enough evidence to bury both Bethany and Brad. I thought I was done with the games, but it was clear they weren't done with me. Later that evening, I sat down and made some calls. First, to a private investigator I knew could dig up everything about Brad. His past, his finances, his associates. The kind of dirt that would force him to back off, to stay out of my way. Then I called my lawyer. It's time to escalate. We're not going to play nice anymore. The next few days felt like a blur. I kept my distance from Heidi, trying to protect her from the growing tension, though it was getting harder to avoid the fallout. Brad's visit to my house had left a scar, and now everything seemed to be moving too fast, too dangerously. I had a feeling things were about to get a lot messier. Bethany might be broken, but Brad? Brad was a different kind of animal. He'd already proven he would go to any lengths to get what he wanted. And I was done letting them use me as a pawn in their twisted game. Then came the call I had been expecting. Barrington, my lawyer said when I picked up the phone. We found some serious dirt on Brad. It's all there. I'm putting together a plan. We'll hit him where it hurts. I grinned, a cold satisfaction spreading through me. Do it, and make sure it's enough to make him vanish for good. As the week went on, things continued to spiral. Heidi stayed with me more often, and I made sure she knew I was there for her, no matter what. But I knew the tension was building. It was only a matter of time before Brad did something drastic, something that would force my hand. By the end of the week, things came to a head. I'd tracked Brad's movements, found where he was staying, and discovered more than I'd bargained for. He was trying to buy influence, moving money around, laundering it through shady accounts and contacts. The private investigator had found something even worse. Brad had ties to some dangerous people. He was in deep with a criminal network. It was the kind of thing that could ruin not just his life, but anyone close to him. I was standing at a crossroads. I could bring this to the authorities, take everything down the legal route, or I could use the information to make him back off, to ensure he never threatened me or Heidi again. I knew what needed to be done. That night, I drove to Brad's place. When he opened the door, I could see the panic in his eyes. He was starting to realize that I wasn't bluffing anymore. You've made a big mistake, Brad, I said quietly, stepping into his entryway. What the hell do you want? He sneered, trying to look tough, but there was a flicker of fear in his eyes. I smiled. I think it's time you learned just how small you really are. Bethany walked in, her eyes scanning the room as if assessing the situation, wary yet resolute. Her face was harder now, lines of age and stress carving deeper into her once pristine features. The woman I had known, the one I had loved, was no longer there. I motioned to the seat across from me. "Sit down. I've got the box. Let's get this over with." She lowered herself into the chair, her movements slow and deliberate, as if she wasn't entirely sure whether she was walking into a trap. Her gaze lingered on the lemonade and cookies I'd made, my attempt at offering a semblance of normalcy, a pathetic gesture to make the meeting feel less like the cold, calculated exchange it was. She didn't speak for a long moment, just looked at me, waiting for me to say something. I wasn't in any hurry. Finally, I broke the silence. "You know, when I called, I thought you'd hang up. I figured you wouldn't want anything to do with me anymore. But here you are." Bethany's expression didn't change, but I could see the hesitation in her eyes. She was trying to figure out what I was after, what kind of game I was playing. Maybe she was right to be cautious. After everything that had happened, I would have done the same. She finally spoke. "What's this about, Joseph? You said you had something of mine." I reached into the drawer beside me and pulled out the shoebox, one that had sat on a shelf in my office for years. Inside, there were documents, photographs, and other mementos from our life together. She'd once asked me to keep it all, said it would be good for our future. But now it felt like a relic, a part of a history that no longer mattered. I slid it across the table to her. "Everything you left behind is all here. Your stuff. I'm not interested in keeping it anymore." She reached for the box slowly, her fingers trembling for the first time in this entire exchange. As she opened it, I saw the familiar old photos spill out, the ones from when we were happy. I watched as she sifted through them, her face a mixture of anger, regret, and nostalgia. She stopped on a photo of us at a family picnic, Heidi laughing in the background, her youthful innocence a sharp contrast to the destruction that had come later. Bethany's voice cracked as she spoke, almost in a whisper. "You always held on to everything, even the things that hurt you." She picked up a small, worn photograph of us at our wedding. "Why now? Why this?" I didn't answer immediately. I wanted her to process what she was seeing, the life she had taken from us, the marriage she'd shattered. She sat back, her hands resting on the photo, almost reverently. Finally, I spoke, my tone firm but not unkind. "Because I don't want it anymore. I've been carrying it long enough." Bethany didn't look up, but I could hear the bitter edge to her next words. "You think this makes it all go away? That we can just pretend none of it ever happened?" "No," I said, shaking my head. "I don't think it'll go away, but I'm done with it. I'm done with you and Brad and the chaos you brought into my life. I'm moving on. I've been moving on." She dropped the photo back into the box and closed it, her eyes still locked on the contents. "Moving on? Really?" "Yes," I replied. "And I'm not doing it for you. I'm doing it for Heidi and for me, because I deserve peace. We both do." Her eyes finally lifted to meet mine, and for the first time, there was a flicker of something that might have been guilt or maybe just resignation. But I didn't care anymore. She was a stranger now. There was an awkward silence between us, one that seemed to stretch out forever. Then, she stood up, clutching the box tightly in her hands. "I should go," she said, her voice hollow. She didn't offer a final glance or a parting word. She just turned and walked toward the door, her footsteps heavy, the sound echoing in the empty house. I didn't watch her leave. I didn't need to. The woman who had walked out that door wasn't the person I once thought I knew. She was a shadow of the woman I had loved, manipulated and corrupted by the life she chose. I had nothing left for her. Nothing at all. The door clicked shut behind her, and I sat there for a long moment, my fingers still resting on the shoebox. For the first time in years, I didn't feel the weight of her presence, her betrayal, the constant chaos that had defined our relationship. It was over. The next few months were a blur. Heidi and I settled into a new rhythm. She started therapy, working through the trauma that had been inflicted on her by both Bethany and Brad. There were good days and bad days, but I could see the resilience in her, the strength she had inherited from me, and I knew we would both be okay. For myself, I found a kind of peace I hadn't expected. The house was quieter, cleaner, and there was no more tension in the air. I'd never imagined I could feel this way again. free. I kept the shoebox, though, not for Bethany, not for nostalgia, but as a reminder that the past was something I could look at without the same anger and pain. It was history and nothing more. Every now and then, I'd catch myself thinking about what could have been. But those thoughts were fleeting. What mattered now was the present, and the future I was building with Heidi, one where we would never again be victims of people like Bethany and Brad. And that was enough. The door clicked shut behind Bethany, and I sat there for a long time, staring at the empty chair across from me. Her departure wasn't a victory, nor was it a loss. It was just the end of something long overdue. I had come into this meeting expecting some kind of closure, but I realized it wasn't closure I needed. It was the acknowledgement that, for all the pain she caused, I had moved on. The shoebox sat there on the table, still unopened. I could almost hear the ghosts of our pasts whispering from within it, the memories of a life I used to live. I didn't need it anymore, but I couldn't bring myself to throw it away either. It represented everything that had come before, the man I used to be and the man I had become. Maybe someday I'd get rid of it, but not today. I reached for the glass of lemonade and took a sip, surprised at how much calmer I felt now that Bethany was gone. It wasn't satisfaction I felt, though I supposed I should have felt some form of victory after all this. It was just peace, a quiet understanding that the past had been the past, and there was no going back to it. I could still feel the sting of Bethany's words, though. "You ruined my life." The bitter accusation cut deep, as it always had. But this time, I didn't let it get to me the way it once would have. She couldn't touch me anymore, not with that kind of guilt. I knew the truth of what happened, and it was her choices, not mine, that had led us here. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the quiet street. Heidi's life was moving forward. Ryan, her husband, was a good man. I'd seen that in the way he treated her, the way he loved her. He'd filled a space I could never fill, and I was glad for it. They were a family now. Heidi had her own life, and I wasn't part of it the way I once had been. I'd lost my role as a father in her day-to-day life, but that didn't mean I had to lose her altogether. I was proud of her, in ways I had never truly let myself admit before. The woman she had become was strong, compassionate, and fiercely independent. That was the only thing that mattered. My thoughts drifted to Grace. I had spent years questioning myself, wondering if I'd ever find a partner who could accept me, who could understand the kind of person I was after everything had fallen apart. Grace had been a breath of fresh air, but we had both known, from the start, that we weren't meant to last. She wanted someone younger, someone who hadn't been weighed down by the baggage I carried. And I respected that. We parted ways amicably. In many ways, she'd helped me realize I didn't need anyone else to complete me. I didn't need to fill the silence with another relationship. I was content with who I was now, alone but not lonely, and that, in itself, was a victory. As the afternoon sunlight streamed through the window, I reflected on the road I had traveled. The violence, the betrayal, the chaos. It had all seemed insurmountable at one point. But now it felt like a distant memory. Time had healed the wounds, and the scars were no longer something that defined me. They were reminders of where I had been and how far I had come. I turned back to the table where the shoebox sat, its lid closed. It felt heavy, but it didn't carry the weight of my past anymore. I was free. It wasn't something I needed to prove to anyone. Not Bethany, not Brad, not anyone. Divorce had once felt like the end of everything, but now it was just a chapter. One of many in a life that was still unfolding. I sat back down, staring at the box one last time. Then I reached over and, without thinking too much, picked it up and carried it to the closet. It would stay there on the top shelf collecting dust. And maybe someday, when I was ready, I'd open it again. Or maybe I wouldn't. For now, I was done with the past. It was time to look forward. I had my peace, and that was enough.